Hello again, and welcome to Winning with the Wrangler at Dick Powell's Leadership Corner. Today we're going to start off with the information on today's program was gathered by myself from many different places and many different people. If you hear yourself in a conversation, it's not all about you. Now, for personal appearances or for us to invite me to come and speak at your location, all you have to do is go to our website, ewfw.org, and send me a message and we'll make it happen. If it's easier to give me a call, 727-422-1833. Today's topic is civil discourse in America. I think during this time, most of us have been through and seen the TV, radio ads, and everybody else. It seems like people just don't know how to speak to one another in a civil manner. Now, I attended something, so I want to tell you about it. It said, and an interesting discourse was had, and I was part of that discussion. The topic was the culture of interactions with faiths and other Christians and Christianity. After 2 hours of going through a history lesson on 5 misguided understandings, a 6th was added to take us to another level of understanding. And here we were led to something called comparative theology, a relatively new discipline within theology which holds together comparative and theology in a creative tension. It represents a particular type of theological practice committed to deep interreligious learning, in other words, comparative, and theology in tension, creative tension. Creative tension. I want you to think about that for a moment. Now, it represents a particular type of practice. Okay? So we need to understand that this type of comparative things, while staying rooted in a particular religious tradition of theology, moreover, while many of its proponents came from the Christian religious tradition, it can be a starting point on the theology of any religious tradition. And by the way, that term comes from Francis Clooney in 2010. Now, I have to tell you, as we listened, we learned that the tension is a good thing and that it holds together the discussions to be had. Now, that's really kind of where the danger comes in today's society. You see, it does require a certain amount of respect and acceptance from both sides. It requires a bridge of listening to learn from the other person and their beliefs with no judgment. Now, that seems to be a hard situation nowadays. I remember sitting around campfires, I remember sitting around dining room tables where the older folks sat and talked about politics, they talked about religion, they talked about money, they talked about everything. And believe me, they didn't agree on everything. In our family, we had a multicultural opportunity. We had some Episcopalians, we had Presbyterians, we had Southern Baptists, and we had some Jewish relatives. So when that dinner table or campfire started to percolate, it was amazing to me how no one got mad at one another. No one yelled and screamed at one another. They sat and listened to the other person's thought process. And it was amazing to me, growing up that way, what has happened in America today. You see, this thing of no judgment needs to be in there. This thing of respect, honor, trustworthy. You see, those are things that I believe we're starting to take and misunderstand and push to the side. The ability to learn to have a civil discourse between people is one that needs to be part of the dialogue and instruction at an early age. Right now, we have several different generations who have not learned how to speak to one another. You see, right now it seems like that it takes anger. We're yelling and screaming at one another, but we're not listening. We're not learning from one another. This part of the learning situation, to dialogue civilly, it takes away the anger. It also takes away the misunderstandings and the jumping to conclusions. I think that that's why this has become such a highly contemptible thing for me. Leaders, I'm going to jump out on a limb and I'm going to say it's our duty, it's our honor, it's our job, if you want to put it that way, to see that people learn how to do this. It angers me to no end. Well, it doesn't, I shouldn't say anger, but I tell you what, it definitely upsets me when I see two people having a conversation, but they're not having a conversation. They're just palavering. They're sticking out their piece, and they're both getting angry because they're not listening to the other person's side before they make a decision. You see, they're not listening to understand. They're not listening to learn. They're listening to give an answer. And if you've been to any of our political debates lately, there it is. If you've gone to a school situation where the teachers are talking to the children, you're going to see it there. If you've been to a college lately, I'm going to tell you what, when I've been asked to be an adjunct professor, I'm always shocked at what happens when we talk truth. You see, this thing about civil discourse comes in two different manners. One is, have you pushed civil discourse to such a piece that we can't even tell the truth anymore? You know, that's the piece that really bothers me. You should be able to say the truth to anyone and anything. Now, there's a caveat to that. You should do it in good faith, and you should do it in a good manner. And that means you need to build the bridge between the person that you're speaking to. You've got to have that relationship. And this is where we're breaking down. Leaders, we are breaking down in the verbal communication to one to the other. We are starting to rely so heavily on our electronic devices. I have to tell you, I went to I don't even know where mine's at right now because I don't like it. But we were at a restaurant, and there was a family of four, a husband, a wife, and two children. And they were all texting, receiving messages. They were all heads down and looking at that silly box, and their thumbs just a flat moving. And I saw the father get angry all of a sudden. And his wife said, well, what's the matter? He said, well, so-and-so sent me this text and blah, 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 blah. And you wondered, he's all upset. Now his family's all upset over a text. Someone that's not even there. I don't get it. I want to take a few moments and go over with you some ways that I truly believe will help you start some positive connections, build some positive relationships. You see, you don't have to get along with everybody. You don't have to even like everybody. But you know what? You need to respect their opinions, even if they're not your own. And even if you don't believe in them, listen to them. You might just learn something. I was sitting with a local person, and this person said to me, Dick, why is it so important for you to build these bridges between people? What's the deal? He said, I don't care about bridges. I'm here to do a job, and I'm going to do my job. And I very calmly said to him that you can't do your job without building relationships, without some civil discourse from one to the other. If you don't understand the way they're thinking and what they're going through, how do you expect them to listen to you to find out what you're going through and what you're thinking? Let's look at one of these guidelines, because I'm going to tell you what, Miss Robin and I, we've spent a lot of time putting this together. But leaders, I'm going to encourage you to really take this to heart. First and foremost, I set the guidelines. Now, the reason for that is that most people don't have a clue what those guidelines are, because they haven't been trained in civil discourse. They haven't been instructed throughout their life, like I was sitting around that table with those so many different religious organizations. And they're all in the same family too, by the way. You know, people marry in, marry on, it's all good. So the first thing, let's talk about it. Set the guidelines. Well, what's that mean? Well, first of all, clarify what you are really wanting to accomplish. Are we here to discuss a matter that we can do something about? Are we here going to discuss something that is esoterical? It's out in the universe? Is there something we can accomplish together by putting our brains together and our hands and our hearts? Is there something we can accomplish together? There's that relationship part again. The second part of this is, the moderator. Now, if you have more than one person, you need a moderator within the group. And most of the times that kind of happens naturally if they're had some training or some instruction. But the moderator sees to it that all have understood in a timely manner the topic at hand. And that means some people like to go on and on and on and on and on and stretch it out way too far. And the moderator might bring them in just a little bit by saying exactly, well, this is what I really hear you saying is, or is this what I really hear you saying? Or I understand what you said is. You see, by asking those other questions, the moderator can make sure that everyone around the table is understanding. And it also gives them time, if someone doesn't understand, to ask a question. That's a good thing. Now, another thing I want you to do is have the ability to ask those clarifying questions. But here's the caution there. You need to learn to do it in a civil voice that's encouraged after the speaker has finished speaking. I remember when I was director of education, I would oftentimes have big meetings and people would just jump in and break into somebody else's conversation and they would jump in and jump out. And it was so disturbing that I had to find a way to bring it back together. And I went back to my early roots as Cub Scouting, which, back then we had a thing called the talking feather, and it was kind of silly, but I used a coffee mug, and so whoever holds the coffee mug gets to speak. And you have to wait till they're done. Then you can ask a question. But it has to be civil. You can't threaten them. You can't yell at them. You can't raise your voice at them. You have to ask a civil question. And oftentimes I would encourage them to, as the speaker was speaking, to write down their question so they knew it was going to be clear and ready to go when the speaker was done and the questions were going to be available. But if you're jumping into a speaker, someone who's trying to tell their side or make you understand they're speaking, and you stop them in the middle of something and jump in, not only is it rude, but it really sets a different tone. When you do that, that's when the anger happens. That's when the discourse falls apart. And so as a moderator, as the leader, you're going to need to make sure that doesn't happen. And if it does, stop it. That's your job. But this is why this ongoing education of Learning how to have civil discourse with one another is so important. And I think we need to put it in place in our schools in an early age. I think that we need to put it in place in elementary, middle, and high school, in college. We need to make sure that it's ingrained in our organizationals, the nonprofits, the for-profits, your companies, everywhere you go. And I'm going to tell you what I especially believe needs to happen in our churches. I'm kind of disappointed in our churches right now, so working with the leadership has been a real struggle. All right, let's move on here. So we had clarify what you really are wanting to accomplish. The moderator sees to it all have understood in a timely manner the topic at hand, and to have the ability to ask clarifying questions in a civil voice is encouraged after the speaker is finished speaking. This one should just be normal. Only one person can speak at a time. I think I've hammered that one pretty good. I want you to think about being around a campfire or that round table where everyone will be placed on level ground. You see, the Knights of the Round Table were around for a reason. The disciples sat around a round table for a reason. Yep, cowboys sat around a campfire for a reason. Made everybody equal. And in today's world, we talk about equal, but we have to be careful. There's equal, and then there's I want to be better than. And I want to be better than is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about everyone having equal opportunity to share their beliefs, to share their ideas, to share their thoughts, but only one person speaks at a time. Another thing I'm going to encourage you during this set of guidelines is always have the ability to say this. You can probably write it down and remember it. I have a different conviction about that. And say it calmly when you disagree. And it's okay to have a different conviction. You see, I live my life by a set of rules. And if you ever listen to the Wrangler, you know the Wrangler's got 50 of them. And he lives by those rules, and I've always lived by them. The thing is what I've had to learn in today's society, very few people have a set of rules that they live by. They just willy-nilly go through it, and whatever's good with everybody. So have the ability, if you disagree, to say these words. I have a different conviction about that. Simple as that. Nothing else needs to be said. But you can do it with a smile. You can do it with a way that everybody walks away friends. Everybody walks away with a good feeling and not anyone yelling and screaming at one another. Lately, I've had to stop a couple meetings that got really heated. And I just told the people how disappointed I was with them that grown-ups would act such a way. Especially at one meeting where young people were actually in the meeting. Disappointed? You betcha. All right, let's move on. I'm going to encourage you to start with small groups or maybe even pairs, depending on the size of your group, and repeat it often. One of the best ways that we have found here at Earth, Wind, Fire, Water Training and Development, we found to bring people together is to start off with just two people sitting down and really having an in-depth discussion about their values, about what their rules are they live by. Where'd they come from? How'd they learn them? How'd they come about those things? And those two people share back and forth using the guidelines that we've already laid down. You'd be amazed what you find out about a person. And you'd be amazed what maybe you'd be learning from someone else. And maybe they'll learn about you. And you know what? Building relationships are kind of scary. Sometimes they get kind of messy. Sometimes you learn more about someone than you want to know. What I'm trying to say is until we learn to build bridges, until we learn to understand one another, we'll always have this hate and discord. So start off with just maybe a pair, but then move to maybe several pairs in a group, and enjoy something, enjoy one another, going around and just talking about maybe just where'd you grow up? How'd you grow up? You know, people find out I grew up in a swamp, they go, well, yeah, we can believe that, sure enough. But when they talk to my wife, how she was, come from Niagara Falls and then married somebody like me, that's a good story. At least most people get a kick out of it. Think about those things. Start off the small groups. Have some leaders. I'm going to encourage you to have some meeting times where you do some instruction. Instruction? Yeah, instruct others on the concept of civil discourse, word usage, how people respond and react to different words in different places, especially from different backgrounds. Use that time to stretch their mind, but also stretch your corporation, stretch your company, stretch your church to be able to build those bridges and build those relationships. People do what people see and people repeat what people hear. But if they don't even get the chance, they just go away. That's what happens. So instruct others on this concept of civil discourse. Some simple dialogue starters. It sounds so easy. Just exchange your name and let one person start a conversation. Hi, I'm Dick Powell, Leadership Wrangler. And the one thing they always ask me is, what's a leadership wrangler? It's a great way to start a conversation. Get to take and talk to them. Respect the guidelines that are at the top here and we've gone over. Now, I'm going to encourage you to respect those guidelines, because I'll tell you what, if you do and you get used to using them, you're going to find that you'll flow from one conversation to another, and it's always very civil, and it's always very enjoyable, and it's always very learnable. I'm going to encourage you that when you're speaking, though, to speak clearly. Be as concise as you can, unless you're, like me, a paid storyteller, and then you get to tell the story. But if you're just having a conversation with someone, speak clearly. Be concise. Okay? Nobody wants to sit there and listen for 4 hours on how you comb your hair. Well, that's why I wear a hat, because I don't have much left. But say it with as few words as possible. Okay? You can tell more if needed when asked or inquired from. You see, by keeping it clearly and concise, people are going to ask that next question. Well, tell me more. And then when it gets to be a certain part, you need to take a turn and say, well, hey, we've talked enough about me. Let's talk about you. And for goodness sakes, listen, not just to respond. Just listen and relax. So many times in today's world, someone just wants someone to listen to them. It's not so much that they have a terrible thing to tell you. It's not so much that anything terrible is happening in the world. They just need someone to listen to them. I'm going to go over the guidelines quickly, just because I believe they're so important. On this topic of civil discourse in America, I believe it's so important that we start learning how to speak to one another in a civil manner, in a civil voice, in a civil tone, and not yelling at each other like I've been hearing, not being so divisive that it's your way or the highway, not being so right and left. It's more to it than that. But when I sit and talk to someone, I have to tell you that I'm always looking to really clarify what we're really there to accomplish. If I'm just there to accomplish, to share stories with one another, that's great with me. If I'm there to do business, that's good. If I'm there to help someone through a situation, whatever it is, I've got to know why I'm there. And you want to respect their time as much as you want them to respect your time. If you're in a large group, make sure there is some kind of moderator there. And usually they'll rise to the top, and make sure that moderator sees to all have understood in a timely manner the topic at hand and is moving in a wonderful direction. Always encouraged to have the ability to ask a question civilly, not yelled at, not disrespected, not turned down, but ask a question in a way the person's going to answer. You see, you get what you give. So if you yell a question, if in an angry manner, that's probably what you're going to receive. And that tears apart the civil discourse that we're trying to learn here. Remember, only one person speaks at a time. If you have a large group, find a way to do that, whether it's with a talking feather, a coffee mug, or whatever it is, whoever's holding that, they get to speak until they're done. Within reason, because the moderator is going to say, well, I think we appreciate everything you've got to say. We need to move on. Is there any questions? Who's next? You see how that works so easily. I want you to think of yourself as being around a campfire, a round table, and just enjoying the person across from you, the person next to you on both sides, and enjoying them for who they are. Even if they're different religion, they're different color, they're different place of the country, heck, I even get along with people from New York City, which is pretty amazing from the way I grew up. But hey, it's not a big deal. We're all people. Building that bridge is going to be the important part. I do want to encourage you to write down these words. Have the ability, when you disagree, have the ability to just state clearly, not angrily, just clearly, I have a different conviction about that. Simple. If they ask you to explain it, you can. But many times I find that just saying those words, I have a different conviction about that, they understand that we still can like one another, we can still respect one another, we can still find common ground with one another. It's just on that point we disagree. And that's not a terrible thing. And it's okay to disagree and still retain a civil atmosphere. Simple guidelines. I know they sound so simple. I'm missing a piece of paper here somewhere, but we'll get by. Just remember a couple things. The person sitting alongside of you can learn from you, and I guarantee you the person you're sitting alongside of, you can learn from. If we would just take the time to listen, to understand, instead of listen to give an answer. My name is Dick Powell. I'm the Leadership Wrangler. Here at Earth, Wind, Fire, Water Training Development, we spend our entire time working on leadership opportunities with different organizations. One of the biggest opportunities we have found lately is working with the leadership of churches around the country, teaching them and instructing them how to be better leaders within their organization. Robin and I have had the wonderful pleasure of working with profit companies as well as nonprofit companies. And the thing we've learned is that there's some really big differences on the leadership opportunities. And we would love to share those with you. So we would love to come to your location and do an instruction. All you have to do is go to our website, ewfw.org, send us a message, and we'll take and get together and figure out how to make that happen. If you'd just rather call me about something that happened today, no problem, 727-422-1833. I want to thank you all for tuning in today. Until next time, DW the Wrangler saying, ride hard, ride fast.